Is rent control coming to Burbank? We take you to the first of 5 community meetings to hear the pros and cons.
This is another edition of My Burbank News.
City officials, renters, and landlords all descended upon the Joslin Center on Saturday, September 7th, 2024, to hear about additional rent controls that may be proposed in Burbank that would be stronger than the current state mandates. First, members of the city gave an overview of where the law stands now and what other cities are doing, and then held a question and answer period with members of the public. Here is the meeting.
Again, Maribel Leland, and I'm here this morning to provide an overview of some information that will help as we proceed through the morning, as was explained. Just some information on existing local and state mandated regulations on tenant protections in order to gather your feedback and your opinion on a potential rent cap for the city of Burbank. Before we start, let's go over some of the initiatives already taken by the Burbank City Council to strengthen tenant protections within the city. The timeline on the screen provides the details on each item presented to the council since the beginning of 2023 and shows the evolution of local tenant protection efforts within the city. The recent notable initiatives undertaken by the council include the implementation of a rent-to-relocation program with the city's general funds of $500,000 to provide financial assistance to eligible households who had received a no-fault notice to vacate as of April 1st, 2023. An adoption of an emergency tenant protection ordinance that established an increased relocation assistance of 3 months of the tenant's current rent for no-fault just cause evictions due to a substantial remodel. Further, the ordinance requires the owner of a residential rental unit to provide the tenant with copies of city-issued permits demonstrating a substantial remodel, as well as provide tenants with a written out detailed account of the scope of work that includes why the work cannot be completed within 30 days. Failure to comply will render the notice of termination of a tenancy void, and as such, an affirmative defense in civil court. Is the audio better? Yeah, I apologize. Yes? Okay, in the back, I need to thumbs up. Thank you. Lastly, adoption of a tenant protection ordinance that establishes an increased relocation assistance fee for all no-fault just cause evictions, local regulations on anti-retaliation, and local enforcement provisions that allow the city attorney the authority to implement the tenant protection regulations. So what exactly is a rent cap? A rent cap is a limit on a rent increase that a rental property owner or landlord can charge annually on their residential rental unit each. In 2020, the California Tenant Protection Act of 2019, also known as AB 1482, became effective. It established a statewide rent cap of 5% plus the CPI, plus the increase in the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, with a limit of 10%. Effective August of the year, the state mandated annual rent cap in Burbank is 8.9%. In other words, if your monthly rent is $2,000, the rent increases, and the rent increase is 8.9%, that the total rent after an annual increase cannot exceed $2,178 per month. This cap can fluctuate every August from a minimum increase cap of 5% to the maximum cap of 10%. Currently, Burbank follows the state mandated rent cap. Also, there are a number of concepts that will be helpful to understand the context of tenant protections. These are just cause. It refers to the basis for the eviction. There are 2 types of just cause evictions, no fault and at fault. Each have different legal implications for the tenant being noticed. No fault just cause evictions, or eviction of a tenant due to no fault of the tenant, include evictions where there is intent to occupy a rental unit by the owner's relatives, withdrawal of the unit from the rental market, an order issued by a government agency or court to vacate a rental unit, or the owner's intent to demolish or substantially remodel a rental unit. At-call evictions are typically caused by a tenant's breach of a lease or other nuisance behaviors such as failure to pay rent or damaging the premises or interfering with other tenants' use and enjoyment of the property. City attorneys under the state law are now authorized to take enforcement action, including seeking injunctive relief, which are orders for a party to perform or refrain from performing certain actions. Additionally, the city's attorney's enforcement can be used by a tenant in an eviction proceeding as an affirmative defense on a basis for avoiding the eviction. And an administrative remedy refers to the enforcement assistance provided through the Burbank Municipal Code that can be administered by city staff. Let's review the tenant protection regulations that currently apply to renters in the city of Burbank. These include AB 1482, or the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, SB 567, that became effective in April of 2024 and that amended several provisions of the 2019 Tenant Protection Act. Burbank's Local Tenant Protection Ordinance, which became effective August 30th of this year, and superseded the prior city ordinances on tenant protection as well as the renter relocation program. The next few slides will elaborate on each of these laws that are currently applicable to Burbank. Let's begin with AB 1482. The Tenant Protection Act of 2019 became effective in January of 2020, and it established three things: just cause protection to tenants who have resided in their unit for at least 12 months. That means a notice of eviction to any tenant who has occupied a residential rental unit for more than 12 months shall include a written just cause statement explaining the reason for eviction. Secondly, for no-fault just cause evictions, where a tenant is not at fault, a property owner is required to provide a relocation assistance fee or a rent waiver that is equal to a tenant's 1 month rent in effect when the notice of the termination was issued. Finally, the law establishes a statewide rent cap on annual rent increases by limiting the rent increase each year to 5% plus the CPI, with an overall rent not to exceed 10%. After AB 1482, the state passed SB 567 that became effective in April of 2024. SB 567 amended several provisions of AB 1482, and we'll go over each of these changes. The first change was made to the substantial remodel provision. In the case of a no-fault just cause eviction due to substantial remodel or demolition, the state law specifies that a qualified substantial remodel must be of a nature that can't be reasonably accomplished in a safe manner without a tenant vacating the unit for at least 30 consecutive days. Additionally, state law requires an owner of a residential real property to provide notice to tenants informing them of the intent to demolish or substantially remodel the unit, a description of the proposed work, and approximate expected duration of the work. And the owner is required to provide copies of permits for the proposed substantial remodel or demolition. Furthermore, SB 567 allows the right to return to a unit at the same rent and lease terms in effect at the time the tenant vacated, if the substantial remodeling demolition of the property is not commenced or completed within the notified time, and if the owner or relatives fail to move in, or I should say, if the owner or relatives fail to move in within 90 days in case of no-fault just cause eviction, or if the intended occupant fails to occupy the unit for 12 consecutive months. SB 567 also establishes an enforcement mechanism by authorizing tenants to file civil actions against the property owners to seek injunctive relief and/or damages for any violations. Moreover, it authorizes local governments to seek injunctive relief for any property owner violations of the tenant protection and rent cap provisions contained in AB 1482. In plain language, the city attorney can intervene if a landlord violates the state law provision. In addition to state regulations on tenant protections, Burbank has established local protection regulations. These include an increased relocation assistance fee of 3 months of the tenant's current rent for all no-fault just cause evictions specified in state law, implementing a stricter relocation assistance fee beyond the 1 month rent required by the state law. Local regulations prohibiting retaliatory action by a property owner, including decrease in services, increase in rent, and termination of tenancy. Finally, Burbank has established a local enforcement mechanism where an inactive tenant can seek damages or injunctive relief through civil action, and the local regulations also authorize the city attorney's office to seek injunctive relief in case of violation of local rights regulations relating to no-fault just cause protection. Further, tenants can request administrative relief through the city's code enforcement process for violation of anti-retaliation provisions. In addition to these local regulations, the council has directed staff to bring back additional regulations exploring small mom-and-pop landlord exemptions, anti-harassment regulations derived from tenants' civil rights, expanding the no-fault just cause provisions to all unit types, prohibiting renovation evictions by providing first rights to reoccupy, and exploring the concept of an additional month relocation assistance for qualified tenants, such as the elderly or disabled. Now that we have broadly covered all the tenant protection regulations that apply to the city of Burbank, let's look at the possibility of a potential local rent cap that would apply to residential rental units within the city of Burbank. We know that the state already establishes...
Here, I have a question. What protects us like that?
Nothing.
Wait, when you live in Great City, we have a bath.
We'll address that when the comments made at the microphone later, after the presentation.
Thank you. For now, I'm going through the presentation just for information, and then we will be addressing questions.
Thank
you for those that do have this information for bearing with me. I want to make sure we're all starting, the team wants to make sure we're all starting from the same framework and for the same knowledge, so I appreciate sitting through this information again. Almost there. And I know it's very dense and very complex, but thank you for bearing with me. We mentioned financially, we know that the state already establishes a statewide rent cap for California tenants. If Burbank were to establish a local rent cap, it would have to be either consistent or more restrictive than the state mandated rent cap. Keeping this in mind, the city can look into a few ideas that are listed in the following slide. Idea number one is to not implement a local rent cap, and the city can continue to follow the state mandated rent cap, which is 5% plus the increase in the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI, with the overall rent increase limited at 10%. Idea number two is to establish a hard rent cap that is more restrictive than the state mandated rent cap. For example, currently the statewide rent cap is at 8.9%, and the city can opt for a rent cap that is lower than the state mandated rent cap, restricting the annual rent increase to anywhere below 8.9%. Or the city can look into idea number three, wherein the city doesn't opt for a hard rent cap, but instead establishes a rent limit as a trigger that will allow rental property owners that raise the rent beyond the limit, but still within the state rent cap amount, to pay a relocation assistance fee if the tenant chooses to leave the residential rental unit due to the rent increase. The city of Glendale, for example, currently uses this model and requires rental property owners to pay a relocation assistance fee 3 times the increased monthly rent. If the annual rent increase is more than 7% and a tenant chooses to vacate the unit due to the rent increase, if so, the landlord must pay this fee to the vacating tenant. They refer to any rent increase at 7% or less as a non-relocation assistance rent increase. Please keep in mind that with idea number three, the state mandated rent cap would still apply to the city. However, it would establish a rent increase limit below the state cap that gives tenants an option to vacate the unit and qualify for the additional relocation assistance fee. Also, please note that in addition to the ideas listed on this slide, there could be other ideas that the city can potentially explore. You can share your opinion on alternative ideas for the potential relocation rent cap during the online feedback form on the website and during the meeting this morning. Having gone through different ideas for a potential local rent cap, let's go over the enforcement mechanism that would be required for effective implementation of each scenario. The city currently has resources and an implementation mechanism in place to enforce the existing scenario with no local rent cap, and the city follows the state mandated cap. And the other idea that is for the city to possibly adopt establishing a rent increase limit beyond which a relocation assistance fee gets triggered. The city is in the process of establishing a housing enforcement unit to enable local enforcement by providing tenants with access to legal and professional resources and referrals, coordinate social services, investigate complaints and habitability concerns, and review and initiate civil enforcement actions. The City Council approved 5 new positions during this budget cycle for this enforcement unit. Let's look into enforcement mechanism for implementing more restrictive local rent cap within the city. In the case of a more restrictive local rent cap, the city would need additional funding and staff to establish a rent stabilization program that would include maintaining a rental registry and an associated rental registry fee, and creating an administrative process to ensure fair rate of return for landlords. The establishment of a rental registry would require every rental property owner in the city to register their rental units with the city and pay an annual rental registry fee for each rental unit they own. For example, both Culver City and the City of Pasadena have local rent caps, and Pasadena charges an annual registration fee of around $92 per unit, and Culver City charges about $167 a unit. With this background, and thank you for bearing with me, we look forward to your thoughts and opinions on which options would best work for the city, or provide us with any other feedback related to the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maribel, for that informative presentation. We'll now move into the Q&A session. The session will last for approximately 30 minutes. Before you all stand up, we're going to have some guidelines for the Q&A session. Number 1, if you have a question, please form a line behind the microphones in the middle aisle between the chairs. Questions will be taken on a first-come, first-served basis. When you reach the front of the line, please ask your question when you are acknowledged. Please keep your questions focused on the issue of a potential local rent cap in Burbank, and please do your best to limit your question to 30 seconds or less. And finally, remember, this is the time for questions only. If you'd like to provide input on a potential local rent cap, please fill out your comment card or complete the online feedback platform. Verbal comments will not be recorded during this session. We'll do our best to address all questions within the time limit, but if we run out of time, you can also submit your questions via email to questions@burbankrentcapstudy.com. And with that being said, let's begin the Q&A. Please, in an orderly fashion, line up single file if you can behind the microphone. If there's plenty of folks who need to ask, we're going to ask that people queue up along the back wall. That way we can provide some egress if folks need to leave. If you have at any point already completed your comment card, you have what you need, you're free to obviously leave, but make sure you do drop off your comment card in the drop box located near the front door where you can. Thank you.
Into my church's work as I was like yours. Dr. First, Houston, and a Latina unit plan. 5 days. And summer function.
Hi, my name is Bruce Wimmer, I'm a longtime Burbank resident, also a longtime landlord. I just had a quick question. For cases where, for instance, you only raise the rent by what the raise in Social Security is, elderly people who you don't want to really rid them out of the rental property, but sometimes as people get older and older, they get a little bit of hardening in the arteries, and it gets a little, we need to get them moved out or to go someplace else where they can get assistance. But since you don't wind up with people like me raising the rent like they are locally now, they have very discounted rent now. So to put a cap on those types of situations where I'm only at 50% of what I could get in my rental property, how in the world do I, work that to be able to get somebody to, move on and get the social services they need in order to, get a better place that can take care of them.
And I'm happy to start, and our panel up here may be able to add. One of the things I wanted to mention in terms of the housing enforcement unit, thank you so much for your comment and your question, is understanding that the council does know that there is a critical need and to see what services or gaps in programming or services they may be available or that we could expand upon. So one of the positions is under the housing enforcement unit, directly under the housing staff, which is I worked for the housing authority, and so that is part of the housing team. And we are looking for 2 new positions that we're in the process of recruiting. One is a social services supervisor to be able to help and assist any residents that do require that sort of assistance. What kind of connection to services, maybe additional income, possibly more housing navigation, and then the second housing services assistance to also track and make sure we keep accurate records of what our community reaches out to with what their needs are.
You don't have a real answer right now other than just wanting.
So the real answer is, and let me get to the point of it. Real answer is you can't use a rent increase to get them to move along. You are already limited by the state rent cap. The only protections you would have are on new tenancies. Under the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, a landlord has the right to set the new rent for a new tenancy, but that doesn't apply to an existing tenancy that's longer than 12 months. So you can't use the rent for that basis.
Okay. Our nation's.
Good morning, everybody. I have a few questions. Yeah, it's usually we talk in the evenings. I have a few questions. I'll try to get by them quickly. To be respectful of everyone's time. First question is, why hasn't it been made aware that this rent cap would not affect adult units, those properties that are protected under AB 1482, such as ADU, single-family homes, condos, and duplexes where the landlord still rents? Question number 2 is, according to the conversations that I've been having with other rental boards and other members of different rental boards in different cities, every single rental registry program is self-funded by the registration fee, which is usually split 50-50 between the tenant and the landlord. How is it that in the information that's being provided here, it seems to indicate that all that cost would land on the landlord? And question number 3, and this is for everyone here, as a participant of the Burbank Tenant Union, we presented City Council with a rent stabilization ordinance. Has that been read by people that are participating here, and also was that taken into consideration while this presentation was being put? Thank you for your time.
So yes, the Burbank Tenant Union provided on several different occasions a proposed ordinance. I do not have direction from City Council to undertake work on that ordinance yet. As to what types of units a rent cap, which does not exist but apply to, is an open question because council has given us direction to investigate other ways of modifying the Tenant Protections Act, including making the tenant protections applicable to more categories of residential units than SB 1482 applies to. So that's work yet to do. So we could not conclude what types of residences a future rent cap would apply to because that work hasn't yet been complete. And the middle question, I think, was more of a Maribel question.
Self-funding risk.
Oh, so basically the city does not regulate tenants as individuals. The city does not have the ability, and it would probably be far more expensive for the city to go collect a fee from a tenant, but we do regulate landlords. Landlords come in, they pull permits, and they have contact with the city. So as to how that fee would be passed through to tenants, it may work out where it's split. All we know, and our best evidence, is a study done in 2020. It was it's called the Section 9212. It's a portion of the California law. 9212 study done on Measure RC, which this community did not pass. And that study itself determined the cost to be north of $200 per unit. So perhaps the most accurate thing to say is it's per unit, however it gets divided. And in terms of the funding, there's initial startup costs because if a program's created, there are currently no staff to administer that program. So that 92-12 study identified $1.8 billion, which has to come from somewhere. And that cost in 2020 was estimated at $1.8 billion. With regard to the $5 million, the initial estimate from the 92-12 report for Measure RC was $3.9 million. We've seen cost increases across the board, and I believe the $5 million represents kind of an average of what we're seeing in other communities like Pasadena, which we believe the $3.9 million is probably a low estimate at this point.
Tweet.
Hi, my name is Lori. I am landlord, and I have a question about the slide where you said that Burbank changed the increased relocation assistance for following non-fault eviction. Who pays for that? Is that the city or the landlord?
Sure.
And then I also had a question. My second question is just kind of a general question. What about Prop 32?
The slide was related to parking. Could I have a clarification to no faults?
So you had it where it was the state stuff, and then you said, oh, well, Burbank did this, and then it goes increased growth relocation assistance for all non-fault eviction, but on your slide it didn't say you're paid for it. I didn't understand it.
If it's the Burbank, I'm asked her which slide she was referring to. Is it, we're trying to pull it up for you? Thank you so much.
Oh, it's late decks and wow.
Do you recall which one it is?
We had it.
They tried it. Come on.
There.
English, yeah, that was. So I'm looking. So Burbank also does extra stuff, but it doesn't say who pays for it.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify and make sure that I'm speaking to the right slide. This is the current Burbank tenant protection ordinance that was adopted in July and became effective August 30th. And it does require, the City Council passed this ordinance that does require 3 months relocation fee of your existing rent. And this is the current ordinance in Burbank. So it's on the landlord property manager to pay the 3 months relocation to the tenant.
And then for the new proposition.
Well, Prop 33 hasn't yet been voted on.
Guys, but answered it.
We can't speculate.
You saw it. You picked.
Good morning, everybody. Because you're coming out at such a early time. Thank you to the city staff and also to the council members that are here in person. I appreciate their time. My name is David Donahue. I have built an ADU, and I've been involved in this debate for nearly 19 months. The question that I have is can you offer and get some sort of insight into the original why we are here? I think you said in one of the beginning slides in January of 2023, there were some issues with the Maui apartments where the owner came in and he did some no-fault evictions, and I think he was a very bad actor, and I think it's necessary to have some protections for those people. But to have a blanket policy that is going to go and affect every housing provider, majority of housing providers, why is this not on the ballot? This was voted down several years ago for rent control. And I'm just kind of curious if you have an opinion, Mr. McDougall, how can the city kind of go over and negate the voters? Thank you.
So, Mr. Donahue, that question is best suited for your local elected officials. Why are we here? I'll tell you chronologically that after Measure RC was voted down, staff was asked by the City Council to bring back a report on generally the status of rent control in other cities and the Tenant Protection Act in January of 2023. And between January 2023 and when that report was able to come back to council, we had the end of the county's COVID eviction moratorium in April of 2023, and within, I think, 2 days of that law expiring, we had at least 20 or more tenants show up to council with their renovation eviction notices. So that really put steam behind the effort that is really ongoing. But every council has the authority to enact or to not enact new laws by majority vote, and that right exists council after council after council. So times change, economic circumstances change, family circumstances change, and the council's duty is to listen to and respond to the residents, and they can do that as many times as they wish. And I, as their attorney, will respond to the direction.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lana, and I'm a longtime resident in Burbank. I'm a homeowner and also a landlord. I keep hearing about all these tenant collections. And very little about landlord protections. I know you're trying to respond to tenants' wishes and all that. I just feel like properties here in Burbank are extensive. The upkeep of the property are extensive. And if you were to provide a nice property for tenants to live in that don't have all kinds of issues, you have to fix things, and that costs money too. So just in general, looking at all these relocation assistance fees that landlords have to pay, did that apply when a lease is coming up? In other words, if the lease expires and I choose not to renew the lease because maybe the tenant has been damaging the property and they just don't want to stop. If I choose not to renew the lease, do I then have to pay that? Or does that not apply to that situation? Also want to impose fees on rental properties. Well, where will those fees be utilized? What is that for? Should that go towards paying the relocation fee side? Because I'll pay for that, but if that's used to help get that assistance, that's fine. But I'm not going to pay fees to rent properties and then also pay to relocate people. So I don't think that's fair. So that's pretty much it. I mean, my family is trying to build generational wealth for my family, for my children, and it just seems like all these things are coming up where the city is just trying to, cap free enterprise is can be diminished. I mean, because not all landlords are unscrupulous. Some of us are good people and want to ensure that there's housing for others. But to put caps on this, I don't think is right. So,
But just a little Gibby. But the doctor.
Thank you for your comment and your question. The current ordinance in Burbank adopted is specifically for no fault, just cause assistance. So that is really, it doesn't fall under the at-fault provisions for no non-payment of rent or breach of a lease. So there really is a distinction for the landlords to be aware of in terms of the Burbank Tenant Protection Ordinance. It really applies that 3 months relocation assistance is for no fault, just cause evictions that are still allowable under the state law. So that it increased, the state law allows the 1 month relocation assistance. The Tenant Protection Ordinance here in Burbank increased that to 3 months for all no fault, just cause evictions. And maybe Mr. McDougall would like to add anything else to that.
So in terms of landlord protections, it's the general protection under the United States Constitution for protection of property rights, which is that your land can't be seized without just compensation. Rent control has been held acceptable under the Fifth Amendment. The city can regulate. The state has invoked the housing crisis and the cost of housing as the basis for enactment of these basic tenant protections, and the council has increased those under the current circumstances. Secondly, the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which is really the subject of Proposition 33. There have been many attempts to allow cities to regulate the cost of housing more deeply, and Costa-Hawkins is kind of the barrier to that. It allows landlords to set the price of housing for new tenancies. But the law now requires just cause to evict your tenants. And the basic protections are in the state law, regardless of what the city does. So these measures put in place by many cities, and the measures put in place by Burbank so far have all been held constitutional.
Can I just say the first name, please? So, populist public comment, I feel like they're very, yes?
Then please keep our questions pointed to the topic of a potential local rent cap. All of your other comments will be recorded on your comment card before you leave today. Thank you.
Just so I understand, so if the lease expires as a landlord, I can choose not to renew it, correct? And then I can set whatever rent I'm on for the new tenant. Is that accurate?
Well, you have to review the Tenant Protection Act. I can't advise you on what you do with your lease. It applies whether you have a lease or not. Once the tenant is there for 12 months, they receive protections on the tenant protections.
So the answer is, if I want to evict them and the lease is expired.
You need just cause to evict them.
Very interesting. Thank you. Could you please double first step that I sign? What incentives and support are you offering on the top landlords?
Council did not enact any exemptions for mom and pop landlords. They gave us direction to bring back a more narrowly focused exception, one that's more suited to the type of ownership. So there are exceptions under the Tenant Protection Act where residences, for single-family residences, they're qualified, they're not automatic, and the property can't be owned by a real estate investment trust, a corporation, a limited liability company. And so council is interested in us introducing those concepts into a mom and pop or small property exception. Some cities have exceptions that are as high as 10 units. Actually, I think Los Angeles might be quite a bit higher. I recall one city might have had 50 units. But many other cities that we've looked at, it's between 4, 6, or even 10 units. But council's interested in proposals that also focus in on the type of ownership that, so, for example, a corporation that owns 12 duplexes doesn't qualify for a mom and pop exception. So that work is yet to be done.
How would that work then for tenants? That doesn't seem very intense. But
well, right now, all tenants who are in units that fall under the Tenant Protection Act receive those protections once they've been there for 12 months.
I'm both the tenant and the landlord, so I see it from both points of view. But it looks to me like you are not supporting mom and pop landlords and offering tenants free legal help and placing more burdens and more financial costs and restricting when a landlord can evict the tenants. And I just had a tenant cause a lot of damage to a rental property. And I have absolutely no recourse. And I am not Warren Buffett.
So council has funded an effort to give low-cost, free mediation to qualifying landlords and tenants, and also the possibility of a, make sure I get the name right, a legal services reimbursement grant. And we've yet to develop that program, but that was funded in this year.
Thank you. What in conflict? This one again about the a long time to request for people is waiting for us and thank you for sharing it to see what my was. I am grateful that before saying those things that people, I have a quick question.
If one person is 60%, so Social Security, they will get 1,140 better for income from Social Security. And they had for one person, for food stamp, generally $127. If that person, single, they pay the low-income building $1,069. Okay, how can handle the life? And every year, if the 8% increase, $1,069 is gonna be $85 each year. You're gonna add the rent. How can the person that she can live with this life? I want to know if the people is not going compensate. For example, the driver is you gotta find one bedroom rent $1,700 or $2,200. How can one person she can continue her life for this situation? And every day is economic is gonna be increased. I need to help that people, and I want the advice as a councillor in the city. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so
Everybody have parents, and we are worried about our parents. How are they gonna have life? And they gotta pay for utility, $50 for water and power. They gotta pay for the only phone to TV, $69, not internet. Are you gonna handle it? How can handle it? And they are very worried about the life. And $127 for one person, generally, for the stamp. You can, they have not in that Burbank. How can they handle? Thank you so much.
yeah. So this forum doesn't deal with all the assistance that people need and all of the high costs of living. The city does have several services available and many nonprofits that the council funds through the annual budget, like Burbank Temporary Aid, also counseling with Family Service Agency, and there is a housing assistance program through Section 8 that tries to get at the. I'm not going to answer your question if you're going to shout for the audience. This forum specifically deals with the city's regulation of rent between the landlord and the tenant without respect to the tenant's income.
Pardon me for a second. I just wanted to add one thing, Mr. McDougall, if I may. Just for members of the audience, if seniors are in an affordable unit that has a restricted rent, for example, they are under a covenant or regulatory agreement that myself as a housing staff member reviews and monitors. I just want to point out that there are some exemptions under the state law that maybe for some of you who are not familiar with would even apply. So any housing, affordable housing development under a regulatory agreement covenant does not fall under this state cap because there's already covenants in place that restricts what that annual rate increase is. So I just want to give that example for the previous speaker who was mentioning about seniors on fixed income. And as Mr. McDougall mentioned, that really is something we are also looking at as a city, is providing more affordable housing options so that there are more affordable housing options for our seniors and those on restricted income. So certainly hear that, and just want to thank you for allowing me to add that to the answer.
Point. This might be a redundant question, so I apologize. In 2020, I think the city commissioned an outside agency to review this topic in the context of the measure. I see that entire review document is so on our website. Is that still influenced about informing the city today in terms of this issue or not? Is that just to the wayside? Personally, I felt that document has some interesting stuff in it.
So as I indicated in response to an earlier question, that report is called the 9212 report. If you just search 9212 on the city's webpage, it comes up. It's under the 2020 election when Measure RC was on the ballot. That report is instructive only for cost comparisons. Measure RC is very similar to the measure that was adopted in Pasadena. The council is not proposing that. One council member indicated interest in simply reenacting that, but we're only looking at it for purposes of cost comparisons for a full rent cap or rent control program. We'll have to undertake separate analysis once council gives us really structure for the next step of this process.
Hi, good morning. With several questions. One is we talked a lot about an enforcement mechanism in my slideshow. I would like to know why that's not patched and based in theory. We have several tenants who come to us all the time with issues. We've directed them as needed told by councils to go to the city attorney, to go through the housing authority. And yet that 6 blocks that I'm specifically talking about were all evicted with less than 3 months relocation assessing fees. They were harassed by the network to the point where they moved out. We've repeatedly asked for the city to intervene, as the Burbank tenant team has been told to do, to go through the support steps, and it did not happen. We also have several tenants who come to us all the time with 10% rent increases or higher when they're in AB 14 HE contacted buildings. And they're afraid to go to the city because they're afraid that they will get harassed and retaliated against and find something the right eviction to get evicted. They come to us because they're afraid to go to the city. Why is there not an enforcement mechanism that is accessible to all tenants? Why do they feel read them to us instead of getting to the city? There's nowhere on the website that directs people to it. There is a landlord tenant commission, but people are afraid to be public about what is going on in their rent payments. Why does our Burbank continue to do this? So I'd like to know what the city is doing to have tenants and landlords know about that enforcement mechanism and know how to issue file complaints for people to remain confidential who may need to. That's my first question.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay, so let me answer that, since you got people's attention. We actually did send letters. We sent letters to Maui Apartments, and we sent a letter in response to your last email to the office. Those tenants are in possession of our letter regarding a potential violation, as is the landlord. So at this point in time, council has been briefed that we are in recruitment to try to establish the housing enforcement programs. It does not exist. It can't be set up in a day, in a month. It actually takes time. But both of the issues that came to staff's attention have been responded to, and we haven't heard a further complaint since the last email. I think it's whatever that property is, it's on a counter, so there's a couple of addresses. But the tenants did receive a notice telling them that failure to meet the requirements is an affirmative defense and that the notice is void.
So when tenants then are harassed by the landlords to the point where they have to leave, who then enforces that law?
Well, the law gives the tenants a right of action, and if a tenant prefers to remain completely anonymous, there's not much the city can do if they don't show up. Right now, the Landlord Tenant Commission is that body, and we won't be going back to council to adjust that until we have an enforcement program set up, which will probably take at least to the end of October.
Understood. Thank that. My second question is just short. My next one is it's been mentioned before, but almost every rental registry in LA County has a split for the rental registry fees and for between landlords and housing. I'd just like to know why it's not looked more at an issue. We also want to make sure that everyone knows that rental registry fee, rental registries do become self-funding. So the $5 million fee, it becomes self-funding. We've talked to people at Santa Monica, we've had people at Pasadena, and if you guys want our contacts in Santa Monica, we're happy to give it to you and have that tell you how they are self-funding. And then my final question is, Maribel, how long is the affordable housing covenant for those things? And what happens when those units said would they be subjected to the same rent control? Or would there be a jump in their affordable covenant ending and then it's rent control they could do as for people?
I'm happy to answer the first part. The second part, my requirements to Google and jump in on the legal aspect. But we do have several properties in the city of Burbank that are under regulatory agreement. So they vary depending on the date they were approved. Typically for rental units, it is 55 years. So some of them are maybe in the middle of that rental covenant, if you will. And many times, though, if there are projects or developments that we worked on with the state or with the federal government, some of the senior buildings, we will work with the federal office to extend the covenants. So as much as possible, we do want to see those extended and not be turned to market rate if possible, because it is a resource for our landlords, lowering from residents. Thank you.
Yeah, and then to respond to what happens when the covenants end, under Civil Code Section 1947.13, after an affordability term ends or after a recorded covenant ends, The rent can then be put at market, whatever the landlord determines the market rent to be. And at that time, those units are no longer exempt from the Tenant Protections Act. So once it ceases to be an affordable unit, then it is immediately subject to the Tenant Protections Act. The tenants under the current law would have protection after they've resided there for 12 months.
Sorry for the interruption. Just want everybody to know we're nearing our time limit. We will extend the time to the Q&A, but we will have to cut off the line as it stands right now. So we will extend it to where the line is right now. Otherwise, we are cut off, and this Q&A session will go until the line is as it stands. Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning. So my question is related to earning housing for British. I'm a resident, and I came here to get a better understanding of how potential rent cap would affect them or not. It's way to say they're a private nonprofit, but would they be considered as a part of a landlord that would have to be under this enforcement? And I'm curious about the potential unintended consequences of that. As a resident, my rent has gone up every year. Yes, it is tough. I'm very grateful that I don't pay collectively. Very grateful. I'm going to take very big care of us. Therefore, I would like to see that program expand to help more families the way it's helped me. But my worry is that a potential rent cap could backfire. Some programs backs. And they get so that they can't fix my air conditioning, or they can't offer more housing to Gorgales. So that's an ush.
Thank you for the question. The Burbank Housing Corporation is one of the city's partner, a local nonprofit housing development partner, and they are exempt under the state cap because they do have regulatory agreements on the properties that they partner with the city. So the rent increase that you mentioned that you're seeing are a function essentially of city staff working with the Burbank Housing Corporation to let them know what is the allowable affordable rent increase. So there is state and federal published rent limits that we utilize, and we work with all our partners who are under affordability covenant. So this wouldn't apply, and would not apply, correct?
So Maribel, so the rents on affordable units go up with the adjustments to the affordable income level.
Correct, exactly. So the information that is published annually by either federal or state, we utilize that information. So that's the reason there still is a rent increase, but they're published by either the state or the federal guidelines as to what the allowable rent is for an affordable unit, whatever income level there is. So there are various income levels, as you may be familiar, and that's where your increase in rent comes in.
And if I could, as to the consequences of rent control, we've heard there are many. And or rent caps, in my mind, they're kind of synonymous. Rent control is kind of the regulation. A cap is the limit, but they're kind of hand in hand. But that's the purpose for the second half of this forum, is to really collect information. Many landlords have come out and talked about it. And there are examples from many of the cities around us. And that's really why the council kicked off this effort, is to do the outreach and collect the community's input on both the benefits and the consequences of another level of regulation.
Breathe in.
Breathe out. Thank you for being here today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate really being here on a Saturday in the morning, and all of you here. I do have I have more than one question, but I'm kind of curious to why we are recording these comments, why the city can utilize what's being said here. And I don't know how you're determining the difference even between a tenant coming out and having a concern and a resident coming out and having a concern, or a landlord, which I take offense to because I'm not a lord, actually. What their comment. So that's one thing. I also want to know. I also feel that the registry is not going to be self-funding, because the housing providers for the landlords are going to be paying for it. So it's not self-funding, and the landlords are going to fund it. I feel that you're glossing over the potential costs to the city
How much is this going to cost the city? What programs are you currently in existence that will have to be cut to pay for all this? Because you have a general fund and you have a budget. So something is going to have to go in our beautiful cities in order to pay for this, no matter what the cost is. $1 million, $5 million, you're glossing over that being the presentation. You're not talking about how this will affect the city and how will it overall affect the city. There should be studies done on this to see what's going to happen. What has happened to other cities when a rent control or rent cap is put into place. And also, I think that it's not stated in this about the fact that any property built in the last 15 years that is a rental property will not be under rent control, right? Am I correct in that? So the only people that isn't affecting is the people that have older buildings. And I would like to see examples of how this will affect the city.
So as to the question about costs, there are many different ways these programs can be paid for. They could be paid for out of the city's general fund with no increased fee, and that would require the council to make perhaps significant budget trade-offs. It can be paid for with fees on the housing units. That was the subject of the 9212 report, section 9212 report. That is, how could this be funded? That report said the first approximately $2 million, 1.8 or $2 million is going to have to come from the city because a housing program doesn't start with cash. In Pasadena, I remember a number of like 1.6 or 3.8. The city had to front load that. And then I believe the fee they charged was set high enough to also repay the city, the housing function, repay the city for that initial. So that's really a policy question for the council on how they would fund it. As to the impacts, the purpose of this is the first of 5 forums to collect what the community believes the impacts are. Burbank doesn't have a program like this, so it doesn't have its own first-person example of what the impacts are. So again, I believe there's going to be many opportunities for people to, if there's information under these whiteboards, there's slides, and other ways to provide input.
And what are you charging to pay back the funds?
So it's on the units, but that there's no charge right now because there's no program. Right now, the city is, the housing enforcement program was funded by a council appropriation in the 24-25 budget, and Maribel and Simone and I are doing the best we can to get that program up and running.
Good morning. As one of many members of the community, I can see this morning that we have presentations of questions from people who range the gamut from the individual who say they're struggling just to make the survival of life, and others who don't have that problem. Why hasn't the council directed staff to spend the money that we're clearly spending here to research the problem, and that is understand what the actual problem is in terms of rent charge? I can guarantee you there is a gamut of rents that people pay, and it's really easy to find people what the rental is that every individual is paying. As a landlord, I have to pay my city tax or whatever it is, or business tax. It's usually because it can easily be asked of me, how many tenants do I have? What are the sizes of the units? How much do they pay? And truly understand the problem, because while at one end you have a lot of people who are truly struggling, at the other end you're also going to impact or help or benefit those who are not struggling. That's the reality. We work with averages. We think that I look at the information from the city, it says the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is fill in the blank. You guys obtain that information from Zillow and other facts. At least that's what I've been told. Those are not real numbers. Some of the tenants are paying much less, and some of them are paying a lot more. How can we get a little more information to understand how to address this issue? Because if this is a societal issue that we have, not unique to Burbank, the question is, should everyone participate in finding a solution? When you say ask the landlord to pay $200 approximately per unit, And of course, then you say, well, half of it might go to the tenant, half of it might go to the landlord. At the end of the day, why don't we all in the community contribute? And at the end of the day, that's the money that can be helped. The $500,000 that were allocated to help those two people who were relocated without any help, that's the kind of help that we could use. Why are we looking at an answer that is a little broader and not so specific that you really only benefit those who are current tenants, whether they need it or not, but not the overall problem that will continue to occur over time.
And
Thank you.
while you're trying to people does keep see recently so there's certain for that we stand to certain but what has as minister as catch to research and those.
So I think the survey that the city's doing does have questions on amount of rent is from a housing provider perspective and from a tenant perspective. So some of that is being addressed by the survey that's ongoing right now. The city's only firsthand knowledge of rents is through our assisted program, and I don't think that's representative about the main.
These tends to also do, as was mentioned, we do use the statistics and the different forms, as the speaker mentioned as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. As a member of the Burbank Tenants Union, it's my understanding that tenants make up a majority of the city. What percentage of the city is made up of renters? And do you have data on tenants who have been displaced by high rent increases?
In Burbank, a little over half of the rental units, or excuse me, the housing units, 44,000, just big quick figure, are rental units, and we do not have data on your second question on how many people have moved or been displaced with rental increase. For the city to have information to that or have access to that data, it would require us to do goals and mentioning for folks to come forward, inform us, and many times individuals do not make us aware, so we don't have that type of information to answer.
Right. Or perhaps a rental industry.
That is too good spectacular. I'm going to be updated. It will emerge.
Why would the percentage of income used to pay for rent what's on the survey that should matter a factor in this? In weighted or stagnant, that should be considered in this when tenants are being forced to pay the maximum rent increase within a weighted or same stagnant. Excuse me, can you sorry, being in it goes into the stars of trying to take notes. Okay. Why wasn't percentage of income used to pay for rent a question on the survey? That should matter and be a big factor in this. If wages are stagnant in a city, that should be considered in this when tenants are being forced to pay the maximum rent increase.
There's third service going on this content.
I don't have, I don't have any information on the survey or as to what was included or not included personally, and I'm just going to turn it over.
Okay. So when we went through the questions, and which survey, the online survey you're talking about? Yeah, online survey. When we went through those questions, we tried to ask as much as we could to gain that information. But that was one, you're correct. That's one that we did not ask. We know we have statistics that tell us overall what percentage of rent where people, renters in the city, their incomes that they're paying. We have statistics with that. And so we did not include that. And one of the reasons why is there's a limited amount of time that people will use to fill out a survey. And there's information that we can gather out of the sources. So that's one reason that it wasn't specifically added. But the bigger reason is because we can only ask so many questions and then people just drop off when we don't receive the information. That's fair. I just think going on with this question as well, high rent increases do cause a lot of homelessness, and having that percentage of the increase is important to this, and having that rent registry is important when considering this.
So we've got something such in there. We should put it all.
I'm a tenant. I pay my rent on time, and I try to live peacefully. My question is, why is there not protection for good tenants when you've got bad tenants next door and the landlords, and I've been in mom and pop buildings when the landlords fail to do something about it. I've gone to Burbank tenant meetings, the Burbank landlord tenant meetings, and they have failed to do anything for us. I have had a wannabe rock star that sitting in the middle of the night over my head for many years. He finally moved out. Then the movie crew guy moved in, and the party started at 10 o'clock with the woofers blasting. I thought it was an earthquake when I first heard it, because my apartment had been shook. And the owners did nothing about that, and these are my cut-ups. I'm now in a different building, and for 2+ years, Polly and the Heldian lived next door to me. They terrorized the whole block. They tore apart that apartment before they were finally evicted. And for the eviction, all the landlords, myself and another tenant, risked our names, our life, going to eviction for their Pasadena with the landlords to get rid of this bad tenant that was terrorizing all of us. So I want a protection so all of the good tenants, they're trying to take care of stuff.
Yes, method.
So much of that is, as you experienced, a matter between the landlord and the tenants. The city has enacted a provision that prevents or prohibits retaliation against a tenant that complains about the habitability of their unit or property management, etc. And the city council has asked for a more comprehensive tenants bill of rights, which would go to anti-harassment. Ultimately, though, as to whether a tenant next door is too loud, it really has to be something on a major level before the city would get involved in a public nuisance, something that disturbs the larger community. Private nuisances affecting your personal unit, again, are a matter really between the tenant and the landlord, and there is a right of private action. The city will be making available a free mediation program. Again, we're in the process of setting that up, where a tenant can ask to mediate a matter with a landlord, or a landlord could ask to mediate a matter with a tenant. That's voluntary. It's more focused than landlord-tenant commission, but that's what we're looking on putting in place.
We need protection because the police were called out numerous times for over 2 years.
Thank you for watching the latest My Burbank video. If you have it in your heart, please consider helping us by clicking on the super thanks down below. Or even better, go to our channel and consider a membership. Your support is what keeps My Burbank going strong.